Thank you. Good morning and welcome everybody to the 6th Annual Community Garden, Coalition of Community Gardens Conference. I'm really excited and honored to be here because my relationship goes back pretty far with the Coalition. Kitty, Nina, and Michelle and I have been talking and working together for many years. In fact, I was the first keynote speaker for the original first conference. And so what that tells me is that 6 years later, there's been a tremendous amount of progress and growth. And so I'm here to talk about that growth and about community gardens and so forth. I want to give a little background about myself first. I'm Dr. Joseph Dorsey. I'm at the Patel College of Global Sustainability at the University of South Florida. I actually have a bachelor's degree in human nutrition and food from Howard University. And what I was thinking about going into quantitative food production when I was an undergraduate, working in maybe hospitals and cafeterias, producing large amounts of food for people. But close I got to graduating, as some of you may know, I really didn't want to do that. And I really kind of wanted to travel, see the world. I was still young, single, and so forth. And I decided to join Peace Corps. So as you know, Peace Corps is a federal organization that allows Americans to go abroad and work with communities around various issues. And my job was a health and nutrition volunteer. I work with malnourished kids in Ivory Coast, West Africa. So I spent 2 years in Africa working with these kids with swelling bellies and the skinny bodies and so forth. And that helped me to start understanding how important nutrition is and how feeding people. I got a chance to travel throughout parts of West Africa, particularly the upper part, Upper Volta and Mali, which is from the Sahel, near the Sahara Desert. And when I was there, I saw the lack of vegetation and the desert area. So when I got back to the States and I started working on a master's degree in international development and ecology, I was thinking about a thesis that I needed to complete. And I found about hydroponic technology. And hydroponics, as you probably know, is using water and nutrients to bathe the roots of plants so that they grow within controlled environments, in greenhouses and so forth. And I started thinking about how that could be a transferable technology to arid and semi-arid regions, because the water is circulating, because it's in a greenhouse, the water doesn't evaporate, it keeps the pest out and control temperature. And so that was something that I worked on for my thesis. But then I felt like, by that time I had gotten married, had kids, and I realized my bachelor's degree wasn't going to be enough money to support a family, so I decided to go into a doctoral program at the University of Michigan. And at Michigan, it was very interesting because I really changed my area from nutrition and food to environmental science, and I didn't really know much about it. I thought I was going to be a forester maybe, and then I said, wait a minute, I'm from DC, I'm a city guy. I can't imagine myself walking through the woods wearing a Smoky Bear hat and all that kind of stuff. Fortunately, one of the faculty members said something to me that was very profound. He said, well, the environment is not necessarily birds and bees and bunnies and trees, right? It's the air that you breathe. It's the land you walk on. It's the water you drink, the quality of these things. And so the environment is wherever you are. And then he also mentioned something really interesting. He said there are communities across this country who are disproportionately affected by environmental hazards. Communities that live in landfills and incinerators and so forth. And a lot of times these communities are people of color. He said we call them environmental justice. And so I got into that, and that's what I did my dissertation work on Flint, Michigan. There was a waste energy facility there that was sited in the community that was spewing toxic gas into the air. And so I spent 5 years working with the community there, doing research with them on how do we deal with it. So my dissertation work was really about activism. It was looking at the juxtaposition between community, government, and industry in that relationship. But my real relationship was closely with the community. And so I've continued since. And during my doctoral time, I worked with communities in Detroit, some communities in Cincinnati when I got my first appointment after I graduated. And I've been working with communities here in St. Pete and also Tampa. So this is the basis of my work. I consider myself an activist scholar. And so I'm always happy to be working with communities around issues related to social justice as well as farming and urban stuff. So that's what, oops. Was I gotta read that.
You want that?
Yeah. Okay. I realized my presentation began when I thought. I'm going to use this. I just have to use it. So, yeah, I'm back. Okay, I have full control now. All right. So my call, I started off, when you do a presentation, you always kind of have to have a title and kind of subtitle, right? And so I was thinking about this title, and somewhere I know that this is a book, something called Still We Rise. I can't remember who the author is, maybe some of you might be aware. But I was thinking about the topic of being about growth and how, community gardens and everything related to, societies is kind of a struggle to take care of ourselves. The government might be there, industry might be, but a lot of times we have to kind of depend on ourselves. And it's well known, this country, there's been a certain amount of suppression of people. And so, I think community gardens are a symbol of a certain autonomy, and certain, striving to take care of ourselves and do for ourselves. And so no matter what the oppression is, we continue to grow. So this idea of having a presentation, a conference on growing gardens, to me has always been one about growing people as well. And so I feel like we're continuing to rise as a people, and that's very important. So I'm going to focus on growing just and sustainable food systems in urban gardens. So as I said before, I'm a professor at the University of South Florida, and I just want to give you a little idea of kind of the work that I do there before I move forward. So I teach a course called Concepts and Principles of Sustainability, which is one of our core courses. We are a master's program, and we focus on sustainability through lenses of, say, water, energy, food, business, climate change, and so forth. In fact, I want to give a shout out to one of my alums, Kayla over there, is actually one of our graduates from our program, and actually I was her advisor for her program. So I'm seeing the success all around me. I also teach a course called The Future of Food, Environment, Health, and Policy, which is a concentration course in sustainable food production and also research methods. And so all of these courses, I'm hoping are preparing our students to go out into the world and take over those positions where they can help build the food systems throughout our nation, but also throughout the world. My research, as you can see here, does focus on food waste as a resource. A lot of times we look at food as something that we consume, and then what do we do with the waste of it? Well, remember, food waste is organic, which means that it can go back into the soil. So composting is one way of doing it. Also, biodigesters, where you have the microbes break down the food into gas, which can be used to cook, as well as the slurry or liquid part can be a fertilizer for plants. So we think of this as sort of a circular system, that we don't lose anything. So food is not waste, food can be also a resource. As you can see, I work with urban communities and agriculture. And also, another thing is looking at corporate social responsibility. That they're also part of this. So sometimes I look at issues around corporate responsibility, and of course, neighborhood gardens and so forth. And that's why I'm here. So we also have, for the students, before they graduate, I'm also the director for our academic capstone experience, which we call the ACE. And that's where, when the students, all their academic classes are done, they have to do something as a capstone, whether it's a research project or an internship. And these are just samples of some of the research and internships our students have done. I'm not going to read them all off, but as you can see, and this is just a sample. We have, I'm proud to say, over the last 12 years that we've been in President USF as a college, as a school and a college, we've graduated over 700 students. So that's 700 students that are now throughout not just this country, but parts of the world, doing things related to sustainability. So I want to get into the presentation now, and just want to give a definition. Being academics, we always got to break things down so people can kind of understand. So agriculture kind of is the foundation of what we do here. And it's a science as well as an art, right? Or practice of cultivating the soil, producing crops and raising livestock in a variety of degrees of preparation, marketing, and resulting products. So this is something that, if you really think about it, it's a purely human thing, right? This is not something that the natural world does. Everything is an ecosystem. But over 10,000 years ago, when we went through that interglacial period, when the Earth sort of started to warm up and make conditions, more open for cultivating, humans who were nomadic, prior to that, we're wandering the earth following the migration of animals and changes in seasons. But having the earth start to warm allowed people to settle into small communities, became villages and towns, and they were able to now use the land to plant in the soil and start to grow crops. And that created, for the last 10,000 years, what we call this kind of agrarian revolution, right? That took place. But then a couple centuries ago, because of our, enlightenment, the age of enlightenment, scientific revolution, those various things, we started to realize that we could control the environment around us even more. So rather than just touching the topsoil to grow plants, we started digging deeper into the earth and pulling out the minerals and the resources, the coal and the oil and gold and all these things. And that created the industrial revolution, when we started building things, roads and buildings and communities and cities. And now we have machinery and mass production, mass consumption, mass pollution, all those types of things. So now, if we move, the industrial, if we move to the next one, you can see that agriculture is not just about growing on farms anymore. Agriculture has now become business, become a big industry. Food is now a renewable commodity that results from agriculture. So there's stage of acquisition and utilization of resources, there's production, there's processing, there's packaging, there's distribution, there's consumption, there's disposal, there's waste. It's now, so food production has become an industry in itself. It is also global, right? We've been globalizing for centuries now. So we have agri-food systems that have increased, emerged over the last 500 years. Now it's a global food systems that generated by profit maximization as well as market dominance, and so we have all these big corporations, we have supermarkets, companies that produce fertilizers, machines, pesticides, the genetic modification of our food, scientific, operations, and so, of course, government, there's policy, subsidies, economic development. So I'm showing you this as the image of food production. This is a large thing that's been created that supplies us with, of course, food for 7 billion people. So it's hard to imagine just small farmers feeding, our large populations. But I think what we're doing here is becoming supplemental. We're kind of subsidizing ourselves to a certain degree, and not being totally dependent upon industries to provide our food source. But agriculture also takes a cost on the total environment too. Agriculture sort of displaces the natural world, the ecosystems. I always tell my students that if humans disappeared from this planet, it wouldn't matter to the planet, In fact, the planet would be very happy about that. Everything would start taking back. All the land, all the buildings would crumble, all our pets would die, and then eventually would take it back again. So when I talk to my students about sustainability, I tell them it's really about people, it's really about humans, not so much about the environment. The environment will take care of itself if we just leave it alone. And in fact, if you think about, one of the things I'm doing at USF with my students is focusing on this notion of Earth Month. We have Earth Day, every April 22nd, so. And it's spent into Earth Month because it just seems like you need more time to celebrate the planet. But when we had COVID, 4 or 5 years ago, I remember in 2020, when we had the lockdown. And then I think about this. The whole world came to a screeching halt. This had never happened in history. And from the period of March till about April, Earth Day, I remember when we got to around Earth Day, I was seeing these reports on the news about how skies were clearing up over cities across the world, how fish, and you started to see fish, and big jellyfish were swimming up the Venice canals, and people could actually see the bottom of the water again. And then all of these, wild animals are walking down main streets throughout the country, and we were on the people, And I realized that it took 30 days for the earth to start to heal itself, for the earth to start to regenerate itself. So I realized that it is an Earth Month. We need a month for the earth to. So I started this program at my college. It's this sort of virtual center, which I call Imagine. It stands for Earth Month. Earth Month Global Initiative Center. I'm messing up my own acronym. But it comes up with Imagine. And the idea is that we should have a month where we sort of change those 4 weeks of how we behave, whether it's around waste management, energy, and so forth. And so anyway, large-scale agriculture is really, it kind of reduces diversity, it fragments our ecosystems, it diverts fresh water and resources, and it can also, upset the nutrient balance. And so agriculture benefits us as humans, but it doesn't necessarily benefit ecosystems. It consumes large amounts of energy, large amounts of land, and can also generate greenhouse gases from our industrial production, which can contribute to climate change, which is basically the Earth is warming because the gases are trapped and can't get out as much, and so it's heating up. I use the example of a car in the summertime with all windows rolled up. And we all know how quickly it heats up inside of a vehicle when we don't have those windows down. And so that's kind of what's happening on the Earth. And it's a very thin layer. Sometimes, I got the microphone now, so I'm starting to get into professor mode, right? But if you really look at it from outer space, I've seen pictures from the International Space Station that's floating, under the miles of the Earth. And you can, when you see the sort of corona of the Earth as it's moving, that atmosphere is very, very thin when you see it from outer space. It looks like it's really high up from where we are as humans, but it's not really that thick of an atmosphere, and so we're really affecting it in ways that we really need to pay attention to. And having green vegetation, natural vegetation, oceans that are not turning into acid, is really important. So we have a lot of negative aspects, but most of our human population still depends upon food, it's obvious, right? So agriculture is not going to go away. About 80% of the world's population are still connected to food production at the local level. But it can be a scarce resource, right? We, like I said, there's 7 billion people on this earth, and we all have to eat. That's kind of the one thing we all have in common as humans, is that we all eat, right? And we have to eat every day. And you ever think about, if you go for a few hours without eating, your stomach kind of reminds you, you start to feel that little growling, uncomfortability, saying, hey, you need to eat. So it's not really something we can stop doing. So we have to keep eating. And so when our human population is increasing to, maybe 10 billion by 2050 or so, there may be possibilities of food scarcity. And so really, part of my lecture is about how do we secure food supply. And I think agriculture, both at the large industrial level, it has to be there. It's not going to go away. But we have to figure out how to make it, more ecologically balanced, but also how do we as people, do for ourselves so we don't feel as dependent. So, like I said, my area of expertise is in environmental justice, and within environmental justice, there's very different aspects of it, such as climate justice and also there's food justice. So I'm focusing a little bit on food justice, and it's a spin-off of the environmental justice movement, focusing on low-income communities, people of color. And there's some communities that don't have access to these fresh fruits and vegetables, and we call those food deserts. But then also they came up with this concept of where food swamps is where you have, because you don't have fresh fruit and vegetables, what you do have is a lot of fast food places. You have McDonald's and KFC, and the funny thing about traveling across America, if you drop somebody in any city in America where there's like a strip mall or stuff and ask what city I'm in, you will not know because it all looks the same everywhere you go. It's the same, restaurants and stores and, places that to fix cars and so forth. So we kind of created a world where we either have not enough fresh fruit and vegetables for people, but too much processed foods, and fast foods. And so either scenario fails to be really helping at-risk communities. Some believe that food consumption disparities such as food deserts and food swamps are a result of systemic neglect or discriminatory practices. And decisions made by the capitalist power structure prefers providing access and enrichment to certain communities over others. And so I don't want to get too political, but we do live in a capitalist system. So capitalism is about creating, profits, and so companies are always trying to find ways to grow. And so their growth a lot of times goes and giving us more of processed foods, right? And I don't know if you guys can see this guy on the menu here, but I really kind of feel sorry for this kid. A lot of kids are like this. That's all they know is eating, processed food and so forth. And this looks like, I said, like this picture. If I ask you where is this in America, it could be anywhere, right? So what I'm thinking about is this notion of social equity. So I think part of it is that you have to think about equitable distribution. One of the things I do talk about my students sometimes about the difference between equality and equity. You know, we think that we should all be equal, which sounds good for certain things, but I think in the context of distribution, it's about equity. It's about being fair distribution, right? I talk a lot of times in class, I'll pick the smallest student in class and I'll say, if I brought in a pizza, right, and I put it down in front of us and I cut it in half, and I give you a half and I take my half and you start eating. And, you know, I finish my half and you can't even get through your first half and you're sitting there on your belly and I'm looking at you saying, you're going to eat that. That's your own difference. You know, this was an equal distribution. You got the same thing I got. But maybe I needed more and you needed less. And so a lot of times if I think about this notion of equity, it's about fairness. Like what do you need? You're not necessarily giving everybody what they want. A lot of times it's about what you need. And so we have to think about it within our society. There's another concept about food sovereignty, where every community is participating in food sovereignty to ensure local and regional populations will maintain a certain amount of control of what they eat and establish food autonomy over the dependence of corporate food systems. So I feel this is what we're doing here to a certain degree, establishing food sovereignty. We're not going to let us be dictated to what we must eat. We want to determine on our own terms what we each should eat, and based around our culture and the norms and things that we feel benefit us as communities. So I think food sovereignty is something we really should pay a lot of attention to. Now, land, space, and place. There is a difference between space and place. You know, a space can be anywhere. You know, space can go up. You know, when I talk about vertical farming, it doesn't have to be just horizontally flat, but you can kind of look vertically and so forth. But I think a place is more important for people. Place is something that you can identify. It gives you a location, it gives you an identity. So place is important. So a lot of times we confuse the difference between land, space, and place. But I think it all comes together in community gardens. You know, you use the land, you create a space where people can come and they can share their ideas, share food, and it becomes a place because of that unity. And I think urban structures are important for that. You know, when we talk about traditional farming, it's usually in the rural environments, right? But you know that we're constantly urbanizing as a civilization. About at least more than 50% of the world's population lives in cities now. It's going to continue to grow, which means that we're going to be really urbanizing our world. And why not grow food within the urban environments? Why not, you know, there's a concept called rewilding, why you sort of let the areas that used to be cultivated for land production and things like that, let them go wild again, let the animals come back, let the trees and the succession of vines and things come back and reclaim that land, and then we start to continue to grow our food more so in the urban environments where we live. So we call this urban agriculture. It's sort of the process of growing food within urban environments, livestock, those types of things. And it's a big field now. There's a lot of literature on urban agriculture. And it's one of the sustainability principles that I think is really important. And it's going on throughout the world. So I developed this diagram to sort of think about certain models. You know, as faculty, we always kind of look at developing models. And so this one, model one, I looked at that. If you think about food production businesses, like we said before, the matrix shows that there's a profitable aspect to this. So there are companies that produce food for profit. But as an individual, you will be really producing for your own self. So you look at model two as the home garden. And model three is kind of what we do here in community garden, right? This is a societal model where people come together. And I was just reading an article recently that says that the community garden is really good for people's health, your mental health. More so than even having your own garden as an individual. You know, you communing with plants is kind of nice, but it's better when you're communing with plants and other people. And so that's an important thing to know. And then you have the collective, which is sort of more community-supported agriculture, which is a little more corporate involved, but still bring the community together. So urban farming, I think these are sort of areas or sites of resistance. You know, as I said earlier on, I think it's important to feel that you are somewhat revolutionaries, you know, because not everybody wants to do this, not everybody can do this. And so those who want to go and get their hands dirty and work in the soil is a great thing. I used to be at Miami, Ohio years ago and as a professor, and they had a center there for community, I can't remember exactly, community engagement, something to that effect. And they were working with the youth of the community to have community garden within the property that they had. And I remember going back a few years ago and talking to one of the faculty members, asking how's it going down there. And she said, no, it's okay, but you know, some of the people in the community are making it difficult for the kids to come there and work in the garden. I said, what do you mean? She said, they said, look, they point and say, you're doing slaves work there. You know, they'll be looking like, you know, they're taking us back to the days when we were tilling the soil for us and all that kind of stuff. And I said, wow, that's unfortunate. But I remember thinking to myself, if I would come down there, I remember I'd go to the fence and I'd tell these people, I said, where do you get your food from? So they probably said someplace like Kroger or Publix or whatever. And I said, now, if those places closed down, where would you get your food from? And they'd probably look at me like, looking. And I said, so who's the slave? Right? So you have to think about, in the context of, is it enslaving you by saying going back to the soil to do it yourself, or is it liberating? You know, and I would prefer to think that this helps liberate you so that you can have control. Kids need to learn patience. You need to watch something grow. It takes time. And then there's an investment, you know, they put the time into, and it's something they can eat. It's something that they created themselves. So I really think we need to consider that. These are pathways of resistance. Because the system, you know, basically doesn't really care. It just wants you to spend your money. And so, as a close, I'm getting close to finishing here, but I wanted to just say that I want to give some homage to some of these models of power collaboration here in the Tampa area. And this social networking, there's the fleet farming, you know, which some of you are aware that turns front yards into farmlets, you know, farming, helping people grow farms across the area. Hope Harvest Garden, which is transforming the underserved. Incorporate University here, I think some of you are probably here. Forgive me if I don't include everybody. Just learning about some of this now. Dancing Goat Farm, this idea of farm herb, something in Pam. These are things I've kind of heard about. Just thought I'd throw it in here. And of course, this group, anybody heard about this group here? Coalition Kindergarten, bringing food, education, sustainability to schools and community gardens. SUAC, which I was involved with some years ago when I lived in St. Petersburg. Now, the ones I've been most recently engaged with is the St. Pete Youth Farm. Carla Bristol down in St. Pete is put together a community garden that's helping the youth there to do things as said, build, you know, raised beds and farming. They got hydroponics there, they got aquaponics. So I think it's, and actually the WVU just recently had a little video cast on television where I was part of that as an expert talking about urban gardens. But what Carl is doing is really important stuff. And then I've been recently involved with the Patel High School garden. Now, Patel College, of course, is at the university. But Dr. Patel, you know, you know where he spreads the money out a lot of places. And he started a high school up above 75. And a few years ago, I found out that they wanted to have a school garden. And so for years, I've been talking with the principal there, the faculty. And eventually, the students just developed a garden club. And they just put a farm, you know, garden farm. So these are just a small sampling of the things that are going on around here. So what I'm going to do is get a little academic here at the end. And I mentioned earlier, you know, climate change is here. It's not going away. We can do what we can to sort of slow it down, but it's also something that will not be reversible. And so I think what we need to also look to the future is being adaptive. How do we adapt to the world that we're creating? That's not necessarily as hostile as we would like it to be. So I kind of feel like there are three concepts here. I've been reading over the years the ideas of security, sustainability, and resilience. And sometimes people think those terms are interchangeable. But I feel like, no, I think that you have to look at it through the lens of the temporal. Temporal means like through time. And I think of the idea of security as a past temple, meaning that something happened in the past. Say you got robbed, or the house burned down, whatever. And you say, God, I don't want that to happen again. And so you start thinking about how do I secure? So how do I secure whatever so that it doesn't happen again? So if you look at security as something you learn from the past in order to secure it in the present time. And so that's a sort of prevention. You want to make sure something doesn't happen again. Now the word sustainability gets beat around a lot, and some people know what it is, but you could get like if I asked each one of you to give me a definition of sustainability, you probably all give me a different definition, because there are many different definitions. But mostly sustainability to me is a present tense. It's about maintaining things now. How are we dealing with resources? Do we have enough food? Do we have enough water? And just thinking about, the past and the present, but also in the future, but also saying how do we deal with what we're doing now. And a lot about sustainability is preserving for the future, for future generations. And so I looked at that as present temple. And then resiliency, of course, is the next one, is the future temple. It's like, what's going to happen when another hurricane comes, or is droughts, or whatever. And so it's planning, it's in preparation, and it's about restoring. Recently I was thinking about these words, regenerate and restore. And so when I think about resilience, the natural world regenerates, right? When we talk about what happened after COVID-19 and how the earth started to regenerate itself, what we do is restore things. It's like if you had a forest fire. The forest goes through, burns up everything, but over time, the plants will start to come back. Little weeds will come up in succession. Before you know it, they will regenerate the forest. But if your house burns down, it's not going to just rebuild itself, right? You're going to have to restore that. So a lot of times I like to break down these words, what security means, what sustainability means, what resiliency means, but also the idea of regeneration is something that we can help nature do. If we want to restore those things, we have to do that ourselves, whether it's restoring community, restoring damaged environments and so forth. Now, adaptation has aspects of flexibility. We have to be flexible as we adapt. But we know how to do it because if you think about seasonal, these are cyclical things. I tell people all the time, we live in cycles. We have week cycles. It starts Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then it starts all over again. We have monthly cycle, January, February, and it all starts again. And so if you know these cycles are coming, you can start to plan because we know what's happening. But also, decade, do we really plan 10 years into the future? We really think in really small, we're taught to think incrementally, just little small time frames. Corporations have their fiscal reports or, reports that only every 3 to 4 months. Academic semesters, they're 3 to 4 months. But are we really thinking beyond that? And I think what we need to start thinking is like, how are things going to be in the next 10 years, or the next 20 years, or the next 30 years? Think about the youth. Think about our kids. Think about our grandchildren. Think about our great-grandchildren. The native peoples who are from this land used to think 7 generations into the future about how things are going to be. That's how concerned they were about future generations. So we need to start thinking a little more further into the future. And also risk management, about uncertainty. We do live in a very uncertain world. And risk is always there. But risk doesn't mean something's going to actually happen. It just means it's a probability that it can happen. And so how you mitigate that can make, determine whether it actually comes to fruition or doesn't. So you always have to think about how much risk can you accept. You want to accept 70%, 80%, 90%. Sometimes if you wait too long, it's too late. That's kind of like the climate change. A lot of deniers say, well, we need to have more data. We want to know more, we want to know more. The problem with that is the closer you get to having 100% of surety that it's happening, then it's irreversible. So we have to figure out how much can we accept, right? And that's what this is about. We also have to look at the order and the impact and consequences. We're becoming much more vulnerable. We live here in Florida, and I'm somewhat terrified of in Florida because when hurricane season goes, oh gosh, let's see what's going to happen this year, So we know that these hurricanes are going to come. But, and they're natural, right? But I think the problem when we have the climate and climate change, and the whole definition means we don't know what's going to happen. And think of the Earth. The Earth is basically it's a living organism. We're on it. we're kind of like microbes. And I know people hate to hear that, you know. But if you think about the large vastness of this planet, each one of us is a little small thing on this planet, right? And so the Earth, you know, is a living organism. It's producing air, it's got water, there's flows of, you know, things are moving, air is circulating, you know, water tides, and all these things. So it's in life. Like, we don't create life. You know, I mean, you have to drop seeds into the soil and you put some water on it, but we don't say, throw seed, bro. You know? Something. There's a power, there's a force there, right? You know, it's divine, something like that, that makes that life come, and it happens, right? And so the planet itself is constantly growing as a living thing. And so we gotta have to help it rather than work against it, right? And I think that's really important thing about climate change is that it's trying to readjust itself. To me, it's like a pendulum swing. If it gets really, you know, hot one place, it may try to adjust itself and make some other place really cold. If it gets really dry one place, the water's moving around. And only getting started on water. You know, water is, you know, think about this, think about water. Just, I'm going to get a professor on here. But think about water. Water is only water when it's liquid. I mean, when it's really cold, water becomes ice. And when it's ice, you can't consume it. It rocks. And then if it gets really hot, it starts to turn into steam, gas, and this. And then it's like, you can't keep it. Water comes down. It's now small particles, right? So if water is only water when it's in liquid phase, that's the phase we need to keep it in. And so when we have climate change, it's moving. It's moving from, you know, from water, from liquid to solid to gas and so forth. And that's where the idea of climate change, that risk factor, is that we can't predict. You know, and with agriculture, you have to have some surety that rain's going to come, right? You know, and if you get a dry climate, you don't have any rain, you start having drought, you have no food, right? So we're really dependent upon water and, of course, the sun and light and all those type of things. So we have to really think about those things. So the last thing, which is really important, is preparation or action. You know, it's easy to talk about stuff, but you have to make it happen. And so I think all you hear are action-oriented. That's really important. So as long as we continue to act, we have a chance. Last thing I'm going to talk about here is these tools of the systems thinking. We have a course that we teach called Systems Thinking at Patel College because we all kind of educated in this sort of linear way of thinking. You know, we all started in school, you know, kindergarten, which is first grade, the second grade, the third grade, you know, go to high school and college. And so we think linear, you're on the road, so go straight ahead. And so we call this sort of the cradle to grave thinking. You know, you start off, you're born, you know, you're a kid, you go to teen, you become an adult, you get old, and then eventually you die. So it's like one direction, linear. But systems thinking is thinking in systems and connections, interconnections, circular. And so some ways to approach that is, so for example, disconnection. You know, if you're disconnected, if you think about this as individuals, and you're disconnected, think about that as mental health, or, you know, how people may feel about themselves when they don't have any connection. So I think interconnections is really what we should strive to have, that everyone feels connected to each other. That's important. I talked earlier about the linear. The linear is sort of one directional. Some authors have talked about the notion of cradle to cradle, that it's a constant process. And our lives are circular, you know. There's always, you know, even when we pass on, if we have children, the next generations come. So we're constantly going through this circular world, and we should remember that. We find ourselves a lot of times in silos, which means we're kind of separate. You know, this may be government, this may be industry, and we don't really communicate, we just talk to each other. But the goal is sort of an emergence, where we're all sort of in the same pot, we're all coming together. And that synergy of being together creates more than what we can be as individuals. I always like this idea of puzzle parts. That if you think about a puzzle, right? If you get the puzzle and it's all in pieces, you don't know what you're looking at, right? But there is a picture there. There was originally a picture, and it was broken down to these pieces. So a lot of times you have to think about, we know what's out there in the world. We're all a piece of that puzzle. And so we have to find out how we fit together with others. How do we fit into this larger picture? And then once we fit together, we sort of see the larger picture. So we all play a role to become open parts to the whole. And there's also this notion of analysis, where you look at one part of something. Once again, if you only see one part of it, you're sort of ignoring other things. And so the idea of synthesis is, once again, looking at the whole system. You know, seeing from, like I say, 30,000 feet, looking down and being able to see the larger picture. And then lastly, the idea of isolation. Once again, you know, we got the social beings, and it's really important that we constantly communicate with each other and we help each other, we support each other. And what that creates is relationships. And that's what made us what we are as humans, is the relationships that we've created over thousands and thousands of years, both competing with each other, but also collaborating with each other. And so as we go into the 21st century, I always have to say, this is an important century for us, you know? We've seen all these other centuries go by, but this is the first century where we have to really look at sustainability as our survival. That we have to look at, we can't look at it as this thing that's kind of theoretical. It's really practical. It's about our survival. It's about sustaining who we are for generations now and for generations into the future. And with that, I will end my presentation. Thank you for your time.